Diving into both Xbox Series versions here, at a glance we're getting a very similar experience on both consoles, with even the weaker Series S looking quite good. There are some definite differences though when you do look closely. Draw distances on Series S see a bit of a cutback. Series X has more to offer here, with extra bits of geometric detail, like rocky outcroppings and stones, that render out into the far distance. Foliage sees a bump too, with dense shrubs and knee-high grass on Series X. Larger chunks of environmental detail like big rock faces and trees render about the same across the two platforms though, so in broad strokes the Series S and X do look quite similar. It's just the incidental details between those larger features that do look downgraded on the weaker machine, and only at ranges that are fairly distant from the player. Texture detail does typically look quite similar. In direct match-ups, in the same spots at close range, I couldn't spot any obvious differences between the two platforms. Series X and S both get very detailed artwork here. At a distance, there do seem to be some differences, with Series X using better mip-maps than the S, though this isn't hugely noticeable most of the time. Textures at oblique angles also resolve with more detail on the X, though this could just be a byproduct of the resolution differences between the games. Even the X does still look a bit blurry here. I did notice a curious difference in the terrain rendering when comparing these two platforms. The ground surface itself just looks different between the two machines, even at close range. It's not obviously better or worse on one platform or another, it's just that the terrain takes a slightly different shape with a different mix of textures. This doesn't change from run to run, so this seems related to a settings difference between Series S and X. There is some difference in the placement of smaller geometric elements between runs though, suggesting that these elements are randomized to some degree. Shadows get small cutbacks on Series S. Comparing the two versions side by side, the S features softer shadow maps that don't resolve quite as much detail as the Series X version. I couldn't spot this difference in every location, but I did notice a small reduction in quality here in some head-to-heads. Foliage shadows look more noticeably degraded, though the Series X doesn't produce a very clean result here either. Probably the clearest visual difference between Series S and X comes down to the cube map rendering. Starfield relies on cube maps, which appear to be updated frequently in real time for its reflections, and on Series S these have a very low resolution. Series X doesn't look amazing here, but the resolution on S looks to be about a quarter of what Series X is handing in. This isn't going to be super noticeable in every shot, but anytime you see reflections in-game, they will be much lower quality on Series S. So those are the differences that I was able to pick out in basic visual settings between the two Xbox Series consoles. The basic gist is that both machines look similar on the surface, though Series S sees a range of cutbacks to distant detail, shadows, and reflections, which don't make a huge impact, but are noticeable I would say. On top of those distinctions, there is a split in resolutions between the two systems. Series X achieves a 4K output, while Series S seems to come in at about 1440p, with both systems reaching those targets with the help of AMD's FSR2 upsampling technology. That means that the final image looks like it's 4K or 1440p respectively, but the game is upsampled from lower resolutions by combining data from multiple frames. On Series X, the game is rendering internally at 1440p, while on Series S, the game is rendering internally at 900p. It's possible that dynamic resolution could be in use here, but every shot I counted indicated those resolutions. In practice, both consoles deliver a sharp and clean resolve during typical play, and both look very good on a 4K television set. You can see a bit of aliasing and shimmer in areas of fine detail that FSR2 struggles to resolve cleanly, though these look very similar on the two machines. Of course, the Series X does look somewhat sharper and manages to resolve pixel-precise detail at 4K, but Series S is no slouch. It just appears a bit softer and suffers from a bit more aliasing. I didn't really notice reconstruction issues on either machine in most areas, and the game's motion blur does a good job of hiding any flaws in action that might otherwise be visible. From a visual perspective, Starfield is a very good experience on both current-gen Xboxes. You're getting an attractive version of the game with solid underlying settings, without any glaring compromises or issues. Series S in particular holds up very nicely, with fewer cutbacks than we typically see nowadays on the pint-sized console.